Like a Rolling Stone, a memoir by Jann Wenner, read by Garveypeterson. Chapter 2: The School on the Hill. I arrived at the Chadwick School with a sturdy suitcase, an army surplus trunk, and an empty shopping bag to mail laundry home. The place where I was to spend the next 5 years of my life was called the Hill. At the end of a 2-mile gated road was the campus with its buildings. Little boys' cottage, little girls' cottage, student dormitories, an amphitheater, playing fields, even a chicken farm. I was the first kid to arrive on the Sunday before the fall term began. My father dropped me off, settled me in my dorm, and waved goodbye. I imagine now that he cried. I didn't. I sat in my room quite alone. It was time to man up. Chadwick was tucked between two wealthy neighborhoods south of Los Angeles. Palos Verdes estates with large Spanish-style homes and rolling hills behind private gates with miles and miles of white fence. Each home had its own stables, corrals, and barns. About half of Chadwick kids were day students from those two communities. They were not only wealthy, but also right-wing, of course, and many of them raised to be anti-Semitic. My homeroom teacher was Virginia Chadwick, a cousin of the headmaster. She was funny, but a scold. She reminded me of my mother, and I tried to be her smartest pupil. She lived with Virginia Daniels, the ninth-grade homeroom teacher. They were known as Gin and Danny. Both wore pants and had short haircuts. No one thought twice about it. In ninth grade, I had a kissing, hand-holding relationship with a day student, a cute blonde who wore madras skirts. One weekend, she invited me to supper with her family, in the course of which they asked about my religion. I knew right away this would be a deal-breaker, but I answered in full voice, "Jewish," which was met with a quick but unmistakable silence before conversation resumed. The next week, she broke up with me. No explanation given or necessary. I had gone to Sunday school at a Unitarian church and knew I could fall back on that, but I would have been so ashamed of myself. It was take it or leave it. We had a chaplain and mandatory services every Sunday. The Reverend Torgany would sermonize. I never listened. And when he was done, the hair from the right side of his balding head, which he had carefully combed across the top, would be sticking out at all angles, as if God had driven him mad. The school put on an annual Christmas pageant, the Drama of the Ages, which consisted of Bible passages, selected and arranged by our headmistress, Margaret Lee Chadwick. The students wore costumes of shepherds. The three wise men, in my case, the prophet Isaiah, make straight in the desert a highway for your God. It all climaxed with a hallelujah chorus, which led to my lifetime love of Messiah. I joined the print shop, a one-man, one-student operation located in a leaky shed near the chicken farm. It had a hand-fed press with a circular inking plate. The faster you fed the paper into the press, the more you risked crushing your fingers or even losing one. I picked up the left-behind knowledge of setting type by hand. It was ink-stained work. I loved the sense of responsibility and having a skill that set me apart from the other kids. But what an odd thing to do for 2 years, and how preordained it seemed. My mother wrote me weekly about politics, books I must read, our runaway cats and dogs, her new novel in progress, our need to save money, the nicer nasty neighbors, and always a plea for me to write back. Think of your poor old ma weeping and moping without you, sustaining herself on the thought that there might be one little old letter from her son in the mailbox. So right! Right? Much love, Mother. By the way, your letters are such good reading. I wonder if you are not harboring some writing talent. Why don't you try writing a short story and sending it up to me? In my first year, she sent me an airline ticket and asked me to come home for a visit before Thanksgiving break. My dad met me at San Francisco International, which was then a one-terminal building with a half-dozen gates. I suggested lunch before heading home to Rainbow Road. After the burger and fries arrived, he got down to business. Your mom and I decided that we are not going to live together. Get a divorce. Nothing to do with you. Not your fault. Still love each other. We'll always be best friends. When we got back to Rainbow Road, it no longer felt like home. Once back at school, I discovered that broken homes were common, and I felt a little less tragic. By 10th grade, I had settled into school. I had real, if not many, friends. I had to watch my tongue, especially with the teachers. I was estranged from the school mainstream, but there were two activities I had my heart set on: the school newspaper, the main sheet, and the yearbook, the Dolphin. Frank Quinlan, a retired reporter, a kindly white-haired man with reading glasses hung around his neck, oversaw the publications and taught journalism, all from a room called Shaft Alley because of how narrow it was. It became my semi-secret private office on campus for the next 3 years. To work on the newspaper, you just signed up to be editor of the yearbook. Your classmate had to elect you in 10th grade, so that the following year you became the junior class editor in order to learn the ropes. I was the only candidate, and I was elected. There were serious misgivings among the faculty about this. I made my first appearance in front of the disciplinary committee, the dozen faculty members who met every 2 weeks and sat like a tribunal behind a U-shaped arrangement of folding formica top tables. I had once again been caught off campus without written permission. A few teachers wanted to seize the opportunity to kick me out, but some of the older faculty thought I was a precious stone in the rough. Mr. Quinlan's journalistic force in waiting was not about to get the boot. The angel watching over me was Margaret Lee Shadwick. She wore her salt and pepper hair in 2 long braids curled up on top of her head. She had founded the school in the 30s with her husband, an Annapolis graduate, Commander Joseph Chadwick, who ran the business side but referred to her in all things, encouraging the question of what to do with the difficult and not terribly necessary Wenner boy. She'd stopped the disciplinary committee from kicking me out. I was a star in her advanced placement English class. We stayed in touch until she died at 91. I had wild times at Chadwick, sneaking off campus in the middle of the night, stealing cars for joyrides, getting drunk, waking up in vomit, and barely making it back to school for my 8 a.m. class. In one of those late-night escapades, my friend and I stole the wagon from my house in Rolling Hills that had a hallway lined with photos of the parents with Richard Nixon and engraved invitations to the White House. At Chadwick, when I was 15, I began a handwritten journal in spiral notebooks at my mother's urging, and despite the discipline involved, I took to it. I still have them. It was the record of a pretty happy kid who had become deeply involved in the life of the school. Chadwick was home and family now, and also engaged my ambition and rebelliousness. My 2 closest friends were Jamie Moran and Andy Harmon. We were writers and natural allies. Jamie was the class's creative star, fearless and stubborn in his ideals. On his own, he studied mysticism and philosophy, way over my head. He was also a varsity football player. Andy Harmon was my sophomore roommate and best friend. His mom was a madcap heiress to a brewing fortune, and his father was a film director. Both my mother and his father thought we would be having an affair. Andy wasn't gay, and I didn't have an ounce of sexual interest, but his dad succeeded in getting him a different roommate. For reasons that were never explained to us, Andy, Jamie, and I were considered a little beatnik, but tolerably so, and we managed to get money from the school to publish an anthology of the best student poetry and a literary magazine, Journey. My journal was not deeply introspective. It was repertorial. I was testing out my writing skills, my fancy vocabulary, humor, my knowledge, anything I could try on. I wore profiles of various teachers, and I was reading college-level psychology texts then, so I was attempting to analyze everyone. I would work myself into a lather about the school's dress code. I would rail at hypocrisy and mediocrity. I was writing editorials. I had also become a semi-BMOC. I was the editor designate of the yearbook and was making the honor roll. I wrote these 2 theses in my senior years, one about the decision to drop the atomic bomb in Hiroshima, a lesson in war, morality, and the power of bureaucracy, the other about Nixon McCarthyism and the rise of the radical right in California politics. But what I loved most was playing the Duke of Plaza Toro, a principal role in the annual Gilbert and Sullivan operetta, their Italian opera parody, The Gondoliers. That celebrated, cultivated, underrated nobleman, the Duke of Plaza Toro. We also did The Pirates of Penzance and HIS Pinafore. I understudied for the Major General and fell in love with the sophomore who played Buttercup. We had an offstage fling for a weekend, singing and making out. Performing on stage put me in another world. To sing loudly and freely could just take me over. The applause sent waves of warmth through me. There were no openly homosexual culture among the students or faculty. Chadwick wasn't like British boarding schools. One teacher who taught Spanish, couldn't help himself and would leave his classroom every time this other boy would go to the bathroom. He retired that year without notice. There was also the senior English teacher, a sharp-witted man beloved by all, who was having an affair with one of the senior boys, but not a word was said. Jack Ashton lived just down the hall from me in the boys' dorm. Not a regular friend of mine, but a loner. Black leather motorcycle jacket, pouty lips, and seriously good-looking. One afternoon, as our gym class lined up for towels and showers, I was standing behind Jack, and without even thinking twice, rubbed up against him. He didn't move, so I did it again, and a little longer. I had an erection. And he turned around and smiled. Later that day, he took me into his dorm room, locked the door, and showed me how to masturbate. I got hooked on masturbation and also got hooked on Jack. No one had any suspicions of what was going on between Jack Ashton and me. I don't think anyone really knew much about homosexuality. I didn't. It was a secret life of intense sexual desire, but there was nothing about it in pop culture that we came across. Nobody knew an openly homosexual person at home or school. All we knew was that somewhere, even among us, there were queers. There was a day student from Rolling Hills whose dad had worked for the Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara. He was a football star. He had a second D to his first name and went from Ted to Tid. I thought that was so cool. A quiet but unmistakable statement of nonconformity. I never liked Jann, the name on my birth certificate, and already had to be asked to be called Eric when I was 8. But I had an extra N to Jann. My mom couldn't resist writing later again, Dear Jann, to commit suicide in college. I didn't know him at all, but I think he was gay and couldn't belong in the world as it was then. I was also at war with the master of the boys' dorm. He liked to hold white-glove surprise inspections, a bully who would ride the weakest kids. Once he and a few of his toadies pinned down an unpopular kid and shaved his head, a nakedly cruel move. He was a doppelganger for Humphrey Bogart's Captain Queeg in the Canine Mutiny, given to crazed, spittle-laced speeches. I distributed paperback copies of the book throughout the dorm. I made sure to let them know I had figured him out. Mrs. Chadwick alerted my parents that Jann has a serious problem with the head of the boys' dorm. It was going to be a fight one of us had to lose. I got a roll of butcher paper and made a Jackson Pollock-style splatter painting. I papered my entire room with it and hung a mobile made out of wire hangers, a mockery of what a regimented dorm should look like. It was an eyesore, but I was protected by the school tradition of art and self-expression. It was a war. Not a great way to live unless you were serving the cause of righteousness. I would do anything, and in the end it came down to shouting matches in front of the whole dorm. He resigned. I was a dorm hero, but now was seen as a threat to other teachers. I went to the top of the disciplinary committee's watch list. When I got back to campus for my senior year, a culmination of a great teenage run, I checked into the senior dorm and discovered that my room was just across the hall from Jack Ashton's. It was a convenient stroke of fate. And then I fell in love. Her name was Susie Weigel. She was from San Francisco, and we were on the same flight home for Thanksgiving. She knew about serious things, including politics, not to mention her good looks and a flirtatious personality. I was enchanted. We would see each other every day at every meal, especially in the free hour after dinner, when we would find a private alcove and smoke and kiss until we were worn out. Nightly we fought the battle of the bra, and by spring I had gotten into a winning field position. In my journals that winter, I was wrestling with my conflicted sexuality, trying to understand what it was, what I was. Sometimes I would find myself intensely wanting sex with Jack, but then the feeling would recede and I could reassure myself that I liked it less and less. I could handle an occasional encounter here and there. Susie was the person I loved. I decided to be on the student council. The only obstacle was that I might not be popular enough to win the vote. My friend Bill Belding, a day student, was captain of the swim team, president of the Letterman's Club, and dating the homecoming queen. We could run together on the progressive ticket. Nothing like a ticket had ever been done before at Chadwick. It was vaguely conspiratorial, subversive, a little voice whispering change and loss of faculty control. But worse, it was progressive, an undeniable slap at the local community's right-wing politics. I was skating right to the very edge this time. To the powers that be, it seemed that a student revolt might be brewing, but my strategy left them no way out unless they openly betrayed the values they had pledged to inculcate in us. We put up banners around campus, a few with our last names, but most read, Vote Progressive. I became the consummate ward healer. I said hello to students I had ignored all year and also paid off a few small debts. The progressive platform. Seniors would have an expanse of their coffee privileges. The dress code would be relaxed to allow certain styles of jeans, and we would start a student-only newspaper. The Progressive Party won in a landslide, 37 to 15. We delivered all our promises, and I even got the student paper off the ground for 3 issues. In keeping with Chadwick's nautical theme, I called it the Sardine. Random Notes was the title of the gossip column. We employed some of the biggest gossips in school. I wrote the motto of the Sardine was, all the news that fits. It had a hand-drawn logo and was published bi-weekly. The 3rd issue of the Sardine had a parody of a secret faculty meeting about students wearing jeans and a report from an off-campus basketball game where Chadwick students had ditched the game for the local amusement park. The dean of men, a double straight arrow, and a faculty member who disliked me and all my works, in a rage that scared me, told me that the Sardine would never be printed again. The final attempt to shut me up or expel me was to call me in front of the disciplinary committee for a little talk. No specific offense. The committee was concerned over the decline of school spirit. They had been seeing a lack of enthusiasm for sports and organized school activities. Their conclusion was that it resulted from the influence of our class on the whole school and due to the influence of the senior boys' dorm over the class. I was that bad influence over the dorm. They wanted a good end of the school year, and I needed my cooperation. It was the last airing of our grievances. I was strong-willed, but they were the authorities, and it was time to stop. A truce was reached that allowed us all a happy ending. By the spring of '63, the Hill was settling into the business of sending another class off to college. I got the thin envelope from Harvard and the thick one from UC Berkeley. Bill Belding got into Yale on a scholarship sponsored by the Navy for his swimming talent and, I think, general strength of character. He joined the Navy SEALs. In Vietnam, he was sent ashore from submarines to hunt down and assassinate people. When we caught up with each other as adults, Bill had become president of the Vietnam Vets Against War, and in recalling the old days, told me about his deeply liberal family. I told him I had no idea they weren't conservatives. You would have, he said, if you had ever stopped talking. My final report card came in. I was a hit in journalism. To his characteristic enterprise and ambition, Jann, though his work on the Dolphin, seems to be adding discretion and diplomacy. And in civics, it has been a pleasure to have this intelligent, aggressive, and rambunctious young man in my class. Those who complain about the apathy of the younger generation haven't met Mr. Wenner. The leave-taking was too quick for me to fully appreciate the 5 years that had passed. The class in suits and dresses sat with their parents on the grass steps of the amphitheater. I was one of the student speakers, made the honor roll, and was given the annual journalism prize. My dad and Mom didn't sit together. Mom looked stunning. My sister Kate flew in from Vermont to surprise me. They were happy. Their troubled, unhappy boy was going to be okay. I didn't go to senior prom. My crew headed to the Troubadour in West Hollywood to hear Mose Allison. We were on the cusp of the 60s. My mother sold Rainbow Road and bought a house in one of the new, very modern Ischler homes in Marin. My dad moved to Los Angeles to run the branch of baby formulas there, which was based in Anaheim, 2 exits from Disneyland. I didn't fully understand it, but I ended up in my dad's custody, and my sister stayed with my mom. By then, my father had married his assistant and sales manager, Dorothy Arnold. She was my only friend on the outskirts of no man's land. Before the year was out, both my mom and dad had cashed out their ownership in baby formulas. Dad and Dorothy moved to Newport Beach on the coast south of Los Angeles and bought a sailboat. Mom sold the family home in Marin and bought a house in San Francisco and one on the Big Island of Hawaii. Kate was sent to a boarding school in Putney, Vermont, and Marty to the one in Colorado, a short drive from Aspen. It was my mom's turn for freedom. The family had been scattered to the winds. End of chapter 2.